Is it time for Game B? What does Game B mean? Well, the response to COVID-19 has highlighted the deep need for systemic transformation and change. It's very clear that the game that we have been playing urgently needs to change. It's clear that over the last couple of years, corporate interests have dominated over democracy. Freedom of speech and the right to protest has been seriously threatened. Media narratives have replaced objectivity. Societies are even more divided and polarized than ever before. Trust has eroded in governments, institutions, and world leaders. And all of this change is now exacerbated by the widespread emergence of economic recession, the cost of living crisis, the geopolitical conflict, supply chain disruption, poverty, and an increasingly technocratic and totalitarian culture within society. But it's also clear that despite these emergent problems, there are some deep-rooted, long-standing systemic problems that have led to widespread inequalities, difficulties with our climate and the environment that we live in, societal and cultural fragility. To me, this all shows as a wake-up call for humanity to come together to triumph against these adversities and to start to think about how we can live differently. So if we call the world's current civilization Game A, then we can look back over the last 10,000 years and recognize that we are coming up against the limits of what the way in which we have lived to this date has offered. The existing order is quite clearly breaking down, and there is unrest at record scales. It's very clear that this idea of Game A, the way in which we've been living life, has some serious fundamental flaws, and that sooner or later, a new set of social systems will need to emerge out of the chaos of today. Game B, therefore, offers us the possibility of whatever can come next, where a brighter future can be imagined and co-created. Now, there are communities around the world right now, including the Elevate Network, who are trying to figure out what a more viable civilization and operating system of society could look like and how it can be reached, looking at everything from our individual roles within society to the systems and structures and guiding ideologies and philosophies themselves. And this idea of Game A and Game B is something that has been pioneered by our podcast guest who's coming up this week, Jim Rutt. He's joining us tomorrow on the podcast. But he's proliferated a range of communities around the world who are now examining these issues and have been examining these issues now for several years in advance of the pandemic, looking at how these deep-rooted systemic problems can be tackled and resolved. And it's evident that not one of us alone knows how to solve these deep-rooted, widespread systemic challenges that we face, or indeed even how to imagine or build a society of tomorrow that we would all wish to see. But what is clear is that there is the belief that it is possible that if we start to come together and start to work together, start to co-create and collaborate. And this is grounded out in hard evidence around some of these communities that have emerged, in particular over the last couple of years in response to COVID-19, where that human resolve to create change has been palpably witnessed, not only seeing the resistance to tackle some of the problems of the old, as we've just seen over the course of the weekend, challenging policy and legislation in the context this time around of the Human Rights Act, but more importantly, the creative spirit of co-creation and renewal. Somehow systems of even greater complexity, or even simplicity, rather, the elegance of simplicity from within that complexity, are beginning to emerge in self-organized ways and from the grassroots up. These kind of creative grassroots solutions throughout history have been integral in moving through deeply challenging cultural times. And it's right. There is no, this time right now is no exception to that rule, and it's quite clear that we can continue to evolve, and out of the chaos of the present moment, new solutions and systems will likely emerge. The difficulty in times like this, again referring to history in these times of transition, is where the old order begins to break down and the new order starts to emerge. We tend to go through periods of volatility and great instability, turbulence, chaos. And I think we'd all agree that right now we are experiencing that turbulence. And some people are even seeing it as this kind of end of days apocalyptic transition. Well, the good news and the bad news is that this type of thinking usually permeates phases like this because it can seem so intense and so dark and so overwhelming. However, there's plenty of good news because we now understand how we can come together in ways that that are self-organizing, in ways that we've never seen prior today. We've got digital technology that can help us connect and co-create and collaborate. We understand cause and effect. We understand how we can utilize the networks within our grasp to actually start to create change. We have more knowledge and wisdom than ever before at our fingertips. Our challenge is to understand how to make use of this knowledge and wisdom and skill set amongst all of us, to not only create the change we want to see, but also to liberate ourselves from our own inner constraints that prevent us from connecting, collaborating, and taking action, as well as the societal constraints and the systemic constraints, in addition to making the ride as smooth as possible as we go through this turbulent time. The current systems and structures that we currently operate within, it seems, are no longer fit for purpose, and that we urgently need to not only evolve our own consciousness, but to evolve the systems and structures from which these solutions will emerge. And it's very evident within the grassroots now that those possibilities, those initial seeds of change are beginning to be planted, and some of those early results are starting to show up. And this is a really important time of transformation, transition, and change. And it's my belief that every one of us who has the inclination, those of us who are on this path of awakening, waking up to what the world is presenting, are offered the opportunity to walk a path of transformation. And that's an inner and an outer journey whereby we must tackle our own challenges and understand how the problems that we're rallying out in the world, understand how they're showing up within ourselves, in order to make sure that the systems and structures and solutions that we build don't become reflective of those inbuilt challenges within ourselves. But we also need to start to look at what are those deep-rooted changes that need to occur. So it's a balancing act of inner transformation and outer transformation. And this idea of game A and game B present us a way of thinking about how we can look at the problems of yesterday and the opportunities of tomorrow with the idea of game B. Now, game B has been largely conceptualized by a group of thinkers over the last decade or so. Jim Rutt, who is joining us on the podcast tomorrow, is one of those pioneers. He has been crucial in driving this forward. And the Game B community largely emerged out of some of the conversations around the challenges facing our environment, the climate, nature, pollution, etc., the planetary conversation. However, now facing what we're facing today, that those problems may still exist. However, we now have deeper societal challenges, we have healthcare challenges, we have economic challenges, and to me, this now is an opportunity to look holistically and systemically and broadly at the complexity of the problems facing humanity and start to see how all of these things interconnect, how we as individuals interconnect with society and the issues that presents, and how the society, our guiding philosophies and way of living intersect with our systems and structures, looking at the power systems and how some of these patterns of the old continue to permeate into the new, and how we can actually create widespread and deep-rooted, long-standing change. So, as I mentioned, not one of us has the answers, but what's clear is that many people are now asking the questions that can lead to the answers and starting to work on solutions that can actually create radical transformation in the world of not even necessarily radical transformation. It can be incremental transformation in the world of health, media, government, education, and all of the various structures and systems that human beings access on a daily basis. So it's an exciting time to understand that within this turbulent period that change is inevitable. When we recently spoke to Matthias Desmet, he said that this kind of totalitarian structures that have emerged are again self-repeating, but also self-defeating, in the sense that history shows that when these times arise, these authoritarian and totalitarian ways of operation usually mark the beginning of a new epoch. And I firmly believe we're entering into that new dawn, a new time for great transformation and change, and that we all have a role to play in that. So whether we're a thinker, whether you're someone who wants to get into the philosophy and the culture and understanding how we can reimagine how we live, or whether you're someone who's very action orientated and wants to get into the nitty gritty of building new solutions and innovating, or whether you're someone who simply wants to hold the energetic space and the energy, the love, the kind of values that you want to bring into this creative process. To me, there's room for everyone. Now, I mentioned that tomorrow we'll be joined by Jim Rutt to talk about Game B. I also plan within this episode to show you a short film that Jim Rutt and his colleagues Jake Ruiz and Jeff Gomez have put together, which illustrates quite beautifully in a very unique way this notion of Game A and how we transition from Game A to Game B. Our interview tomorrow will also give greater context and the background into Jim Rutt's involvement in pioneering this concept. But before I show the film, I want to give you a kind of relatable example from what we've faced over the course of the last couple of years in the case of the health industry, pharmaceutical industry, and what it means for our own individual health. So if we look at the trajectory of where we are going in terms of healthcare, it's clearly becoming hyper-medicalized. There's this element of scientism. There's a digitization, and digitization clearly plays a role, and technology clearly plays a role in our own healthcare. But it's an increasing focus on medication through pharmaceuticals, through vaccines, and there's very little focus on how we actually become healthier, more vital, more fit, how we can optimize our nutrition, how we can localize our nutrition to maximize the benefits of the various nutrients that exist on a kind of regional basis. There is very little focus on the functional element of health. There's very little focus on how we can create synergies between our mental health and our emotional health and our physical health. All of the focuses seem to be around this increasing reliance on trying to almost vaccinate the world from every possible problem. I saw a graphical representation of this today where they showed the number of childhood vaccinations in the 1960s as a pin in a cushion versus the 1980s and now in the 2020s. And it's just enormous. It's just this enormous increase in the number of medical interventions that we're witnessing. Now, some would argue that they come with benefits and have helped us to eradicate a number of diseases. Others would dispute that. But what's quite clear is that there are second order consequences with over medicalizing, this idea of this interventionalism that we have, whether it's into intervening into human life, human sovereignty, intervening into our health, intervening into nature, intervening into the climate. We have this desire to almost over-intervene via technology, almost play God, if you will. And this to me is one of the greatest challenges of our time, is that we're witnessing this this enormous opportunity when it comes to technology, but its potential risks comes with real challenges in terms of how we move forward. So we're going to need new ethical frameworks. We're going to need some new thinking about how we intersperse technology with nature and economic progress, political progress. We need to redefine what progress even means in the context of its limitations and where preservation becomes important. You know, this is really at one of the heart of the political tensions, is the idea of progress versus preservation. If you take the kind of liberal left, the small L liberal left, or the progressives in the United States with the small p, versus the kind of conservatives with the small c, Republican, you know, we've got one side of the political spectrum looking at preservation and conservation. You've got another looking at progress and change. And this is a these can operate in healthy balance. It's where we allow progress to become untethered and unchained, that we lose ourselves. And it's where we become, on the flip side, where we try to hold on to every tradition and every way of doing things from the past, that we fail to actually make progress. So it's finding that healthy tension between these things that enable us to move forward, and recognizing that they're all part of the same spectrum and not separate from one another. The classic illusion of separation is playing out at depth, and Charles Eisenstein, who was recently on the podcast, spoke into this. So using the healthcare example, using health, we have the opportunity to return to nature. We have the opportunity to learn how to optimize our health naturally. We have the opportunity to learn how to optimize our energy, our sleep, our mental well-being, and bring together kind of functional approaches to actually improve our own vitality, versus this kind of game A, hyper medicalized, over reliance on pharmaceuticals, high stress living environments, and where consumerism becomes kind of the drug of choice to meet our emotional needs and wants, as opposed to actually finding inner fulfillment and peace. So there is this opportunity to understand now how to live more nourishing and flourishing lives. And on that point, if you recently heard my podcast with Eric Edmeades this last week, where we spoke about the challenges in the food and pharmaceutical industry, and how those big businesses, the corporations within those sectors, are actually contrary to our own health, and how big pharma and big agriculture, big food, how these industries perpetuate cycles of ill health and disease. We can recognize that quite clearly these are functions of what we'd call game A, and that we have the opportunity to go towards this game B model, rather, where we completely rethink our healthcare systems, how we take care of our own well-being, and the different methods that are going to be available to us on a decentralized basis. And there's organizations like the World Council for Health right now looking at healthcare, reimagining the way that we conduct healthcare on a localized and regional basis. There's lots of people out there innovating in the space of health and nutrition. But there's clearly an opportunity when we make that distinction between how we've lived that's led to our ill health as a species compared to our ancestors. Despite the advances in our kind of technological and economic progress, we are seemingly more stressed out and worn out than ever before. Yet we have this opportunity to live incredibly healthy lives. We have more knowledge and wisdom at our fingertips, yet we're struggling with major diseases. We're struggling with lifestyle diseases, spawning from obesity and our kind of nutritional choices and the way that we live these fast-paced, stressed-out lives. So it's quite clear that Game A has created the pathway for the opportunity to think about how we can enter into Game B from our health. So if you're interested in optimizing your own health and you want to start to explore different ways that you can gain more energy, take control of your mental, emotional, physical body, then come and join us in the Elevate Network on Wednesday evening this week, where Eric, our previous guest, is joining us for a discussion and Q&A on mastering our own health and well-being. Eric is an absolute titan in the field of natural well-being. He's an anthropologist. He's studied through cultural and human evolution, our relationship with food, with exercise, diet, nutrition. It's going to be a fascinating discussion. You can come and have your questions answered, and you can also start to ponder these questions around what Game B looks like in terms of food. What would a food revolution look like? A health revolution? But more importantly, learn for your own self how you can actually transform and become a role model of good health. So I wanted to share that now. So if you aren't yet a member of the Elevate Network, you can join us inside the Elevate Network at weareelevate.org, and that event is taking place on Wednesday night at 8 p.m. We've made a minor edit to this podcast. Originally, we streamed the Game B film by Jim Rutt within the context of the episode, but that created a couple of problems. One, it's quite a long episode, and two, it flagged the content for copyright, which we can independently deal with a separate broadcast. So we've taken out the Game B film. If you're interested in watching that, you can watch that at gamebfilm.org. We've also put it out as a separate piece of content on our channel. So if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, go over to Dan Astin-Gregory on YouTube, and you can see our Game B film screening there, in addition to my comments following the film. So I hope you've enjoyed this conversation around Game B as a kind of prequel to our conversation with Jim Rutt tomorrow, where Jim will talk more about his background and how he got started with the idea of Game B alongside his colleagues who are the initial pioneers of the concept of Game B. So look out for that one with Jim Rutt. And as I mentioned, if you haven't yet signed up to the Elevate Network, do come and join us. These kind of conversations around what does the world look like, what could it look like, and what's our role in transforming the world around us is tantamount to what we're focused on within the Elevate Network. Plus, you have the opportunity to join our special Q&A session with Eric Edmeades on Wednesday night. So thanks again for tuning in. Look forward to the interview with Jim Rutt, and I look forward to continuing this journey as we seek to elevate humanity and enrich the world.